UVA Athletics is about to make a big move to better utilize its NIL resources. This is actually really good news if you're a UVA football fan. Chris Graham here for Augusta Free Press. So UVA Athletics appears to be headed in the direction of finally hiring a general manager for the UVA football program. And what that would do is have somebody in place to provide direction for roster development in the NIL era. So let me go into what this means and why this is important, at least as far as I'm concerned. For a sense of what the job, which in my opinion we've needed to have for a few years now, would entail, think recruiting coordinator with a salary cap. So if you're a decent college football fan, you know the head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, you might know special teams coordinator. There's always been a recruiting coordinator on staff. The assistant coaches are responsible for recruiting as well. One of them is the boss recruiter, and now in the NIL era, you have a lot of schools in the SEC, the Big Ten, the ACC, the Big 12, basically the Power Four, Power Five, because I'm going to throw the Pac-12 back in there. They're coming back next year. I think they'll be back next year as a power conference. They're the ones that already have this position in place. Um, UVA is very much behind the times, not having this in place. The history of this job began to evolve from traditional recruiting coordinator back in 2006. So we're talking almost 20 years ago. Chan Gailey, who at the time was the coach at Georgia, head coach at Georgia Tech, he had been back and forth between the NFL and college. He had the idea to put somebody in a role like in the NFL front office of director of player personnel. He hired Jeff Collins, who later would become the Georgia Tech football coach, to be his player personnel guy back in 2006. It took a few years, in fact, about a decade, for someone to name the first college football general manager. That was Rich Rodriguez, formerly of West Virginia and Michigan. At this point, he was at Arizona. He made a guy named Matt Dudek his GM in 2016. Lots of schools followed along, but this is still before NIL, before money was an issue. The GM at that point was still, under Rodriguez and then the other schools who adapted this before NIL. Still essentially a recruiting coordinator on steroids, you know, director of player personnel with different title. Um, Now, today, schools across the breadth of the Power Four, Power Five have GMs heading up their roster development efforts, encompassing traditional recruiting, focus on the high school ranks, and then recruiting the transfer portal. That's another, reason to have someone else who doesn't have daily responsibilities, maybe with, coaching players. Um, and then the role that money plays in both. Now, I will say here that an assistant on Coach Tony Elliott's staff at Virginia had told us over the summer that the current approach to recruiting within the UVA football program resembles a lot of what you would have seen in the George Welsh era back in the 80s and 90s, and that's outdated. That's basically the recruiting coordinator era. In the good old days, coaches worked their recruiting contacts. They zoned in on prospects. They talked with the kids. They talked with their coaches and parents, the traditional fabled meeting in the living room, and then you got kids to commit. Today, among the first things a recruit being targeted by a school like Virginia is how much money can I expect from your school from NIL if I commit? And it's a fair question because, guys are making money now. And so assistants with schools who have a GM directing things walk into a recruit's living room already knowing the answer to that question. The problem that we've been seeing, at least what we've been told with Virginia's assistants, is they get that question, they have to tell the recruits they'll get back to them with an answer. And, you know, there's a reason Virginia's not getting a lot of the top recruits, and that's probably a big part of that reason. So, and the frustrating thing is here, it's not like UVA shouldn't be able to play the game. I mean, one, University of Virginia has more money than God. Is two, we have state laws that a state law, I should say, not just laws, but a state law passed back in the General Assembly session earlier this year, signed in April by the governor, Glenn Youngkin, that gives us a heads up. The law allows colleges and universities in Virginia to directly compensate student athletes via NIL deals. It allows the schools themselves. They don't have to go through a collective if you don't want to. And it emerged on the reporting on this that Carla Williams at UVA, the AD at UVA, actually was the spearhead to this. It was actually what Carla that went to legislators, the governor's office, and said we would like a law allowing us to do this. And the General Assembly worked together with the governor's office, and they came up with the meat of the law here that was passed and then signed into law. And this new law would allow UVA athletics. I mean, everybody else in Virginia, not just UVA, but UVA would be best poised to be able to take advantage of this because UVA was fifth in the ACC, 35th nationally in athletics revenues last year, head and shoulders above everybody else in the state, to more easily and efficiently direct NIL resources to the direct benefit of student athletes straight from the athletic department's coffers. Um, and the law also ends the competition for donor dollars between the school's NIL collective, in Virginia's case, UVA's case, CAV Futures, and UVA Athletics. Basically, donors won't have to decide to give money to one or the other. They can give money to UVA Athletics and let UVA Athletics either let UVA Athletics decide how to use it to go towards NIL or to fund program expenses, or they could earmark it through UVA Athletics for NIL. It's just a great option. You don't have to go through a third party. Now, Tony Elliott was at the signing event back April 18th with Governor Youngkin, Carla Williams, and some representatives from other schools in the state. And the quote he gave made it seem like he was the kid in the candy store. He told reporters at the signing event that the new law, quote, gives us an opportunity to have a conversation without feeling like you're breaking a rule or crossing a line that you're not supposed to cross. And it allows us to speak candidly. He continued the quote, I think one of the things we've got to understand is that this is all new to the student athletes, and this brings more challenges that we need to be able to speak to. They need financial literacy, they need education, contract reviews that need help and support. This just allows us to be able to speak openly and freely and educate. And I think that's our role as coaches in the industry that we're in, to educate on all different fronts. Now, what Tony Elliott was talking about there also sounds like to me to be the job of a general manager. Um, and if you're thinking with me here, I think we've already got our guy. The guy that I would recommend be a guy named Lo Davis. I mentioned Cav Futures, the NIL collective, the official NIL collective of UVA Athletics. He's the obvious choice. He's got the NIL background because he's the founding executive director of Cav Futures. He also spent 12 years at the Virginia Athletics Foundation. Um, you know, I assume this is going to happen. And assuming it's going to happen, chop, chop, get to it. I wrote a couple of weeks ago about how the 2025 prep recruiting class for UVA football is almost entirely set, at least for the state of Virginia is part of it. And just one of the top 50 players in the Commonwealth in the 2025 class is uncommitted. Virginia is a great state for high school football recruiting. Unfortunately, UVA has just five of those top 50, and the top rated recruit is the number 14 overall, kid named Christopher Spence, a cornerback from Kempsville, Virginia Beach. Um, our second ranked kid, I don't have the name, is 33rd in the rankings. So we missed out on the top guys from 2025. It's time to get moving to 2026 and 2027. Now, the next bye week for UVA football, which is when assistants get back on the road, would be the week of October 27th through November 2nd. That's the next bye week for UVA football. So the bye weeks for a football team, they don't, take the week off. The coaches pretty much get out of town on the Sunday and they're on the road up until it's time for game week for the game when you get back on the schedule. It'd be nice to have a GM in place so that the assistants can make some real inroads with the high school sophomores and juniors wrapping up their regular seasons later this month. I can tell you with certainty the money is there. Um, I mean, I know how much. I've got a really good handle on how much, for example, the UVA basketball program is giving out in NIL money as a whole. Um, I don't know the football as well. I can only guess based on what I know some of the basketball guys are getting. It's the money's there. The money's there. We just need somebody in place to put a plan in place on how it's spent. So with that said, hey, if you have any questions for me, any story tips, anything else, please feel free to email me at chris@augustafreepress.com.